Hi, welcome to Quantum Canine, where we will be discussing all things related to dogs, but more closely related to a natural perspective of what is natural for a dog. This is Kevin Behan.
Hello, Trish.
Hi.
Nice to be here.
And I met you about 15 years ago when I had adopted a dog from the pound, and I used the Monks of New Skeet method, and it proved to be fairly disastrous for me. And luckily, the local shelter directed me towards Kevin's book. And I read the book and opened the back, saw your picture, called you up, and I've been following you around ever since. Tell me, Kevin, tell me how you got involved with dogs.
Well, I was born into the business. My dad was a dog trainer, and during World War II, as a matter of fact. And he was on a radio show after the war where they were reprising the successful war effort, and he found himself on the panel with such as Robert Oppenheimer, head of the Manhattan Project, and he thought, who's going to want to talk to me? And yet all the questions from the audience came to him. Why does my dog do this? Why does he do that? So my father realized he could start a business, and that began his role as one of the first family dog trainers in America. And I was born on our homestead, which was a quasi-farm dog kennel. So I just grew up immersed in dogs.
So you've been training dogs since you were a child?
I've been walking dogs, washing dogs, bathing dogs, cleaning up after dogs since I was a child, and then became a full-fledged professional dog trainer when I graduated from college in 1974.
And now your father gleaned a lot of his methods from what he perceived as wolves working in nature.
Yeah, he was the first one to say how wolves are organized in the wild has something to say about the relationship between a dog and an owner. So he believed in the principle of leadership. So he raised once a mother with her pups and watched her relate to her puppies over the first year of the life. And he used that as his template. And reading the science of his times, that was the beginning of the alpha theory, that there's a dominant hierarchical structure between dogs. If the owner fits the bill, fits that slot, you have domestic tranquility. That's how he saw it. That's how I began believing that to be correct. But I noticed a lot of things didn't make sense. Little dogs always, quote unquote, dominated big dogs. Female dogs always dominated male dogs when they lived in the same household. And most incongruently, cats always dominated any dogs that they lived with. So I quickly had questions. And when I questioned the dogma, you get a lot of resistance and a lot of anger. And so you have to tread quietly in that regard. But I pursued it. I kept going.
Do you think it's valid to extrapolate what we're seeing dogs do from how wolves are in their natural environment?
Well, if we know what we're looking at. So, I mean, that's the question that's in front of us, in front of every dog owner. What is natural? Is natural the best way? What is natural? Now, there's several schools of thought. One school of thought is the dominant theory, the pack theory, that there's an alpha to omega social status, and this organizes everything about wolves. Then you have the equally opposite, diametrically opposed positive school, which says, no, dogs are almost an artifice of a human creation through domestication. And we should apply modern principles of learning, Pavlovian conditioning, B.F. Skinner and his popularization of operant conditioning, And that's where you see behavior modification and clicker training that's prevalent today. So you have these two diametrically opposed philosophies. Most trainers end up synthesizing the two together. It's even called a combined approach. But I'm maintaining that neither one is natural. And yes, we should extrapolate what is natural. But the very subtle distinction we're going to be making is there's a distinction to be made between nature and instincts. So I learned that instincts are not the answer, but there's a deeper level that's organizing stuff, and that's what I want to focus on.
So when people talk about the dominance hierarchy, they're mostly talking about the instincts of the wolves.
Exactly. So whenever you see a pack instinct in your life, you call the vet, the behaviorist, the trainer, because it's a problem.
When you mean
your dog's snarling at you over a food bone. If you look at what's going on between wolves in a pack, we don't want to live like that. That's high stress, high tension, and it's not a tenured position. Being the alpha figure isn't a lifetime tenured position. It's only predicated on how much force you can exert from that position. Once you lose a step, then in the instinctual scheme of things, you're supposed to be displaced.
So
and we don't want that.
If we can extrapolate from wolves, what's going on with our dogs, what part of wolf behavior are we looking at?
In the pack, you're looking primarily at instincts. In the hunt, you're looking at what I call group energy, teamwork. And those are completely different dynamics. So I started in the dog business learning my father's theory, which was how wolves live as a pack. Then I became very influenced by the Germans, who were promulgating their view of working dogs. And then I learned through them how wolves work as a team. I was able to extrapolate the team ethic and distinguish between that and these instincts. And that's what I'd like to be able to share with the audience and elaborate through our discussion.
So natural dog training is working with a dog as a team and not necessarily as the alpha. The human isn't the alpha.
Right. I like to give
leader.
this metaphor. If you join a choir, the energy runs everything. So I think the proper way to look at social structure of canines, and there is structure. It isn't chaos. It isn't random. There is a coherent structure. And so far, the only model that's come up with that is the dominant model. So understandably, people are going to turn to that. But I like to use the metaphor of a choir. Everybody in the choir, there is a structure. There's altos, sopranos, basses, tenors. I think that's it. And if everybody hits their right note, there's a synergistic effect. That's the essence of teamwork. So when wolves are in a hunt, and if everyone follows their specific role, then they have potential for a successful outcome. And that's what bonds them. They run away from the pack to get to the hunt. And because they all have four legs, they all smell the same things, they can run after the prey, they see the same things, they want the same things. It's very fluid, it's very dynamic, but it's a bubble up deal. It's not a trickle down. There's no alpha barking out commands. Everyone knows exactly what to do innately. So that's what I call natural. And that's what we should study about the wolf. And we will find, like I mentioned earlier about the German influence, what they were teaching me was, wow, how do wolves separate one of the specimens from the herd? How do they herd it? How do they isolate it? How do they bring it down? What's the natural progression of behaviors? Those are what we should use in police and protection dog training, which is the working dog thing. So if you do working dog behaviors, you very quickly learn the limits of the pack theory. And that's been my progression.
So what does that mean as dog owners if we're trying to extrapolate from how wolves hunt as a group? Then what do we do with our dogs?
Well, the first thing you have to say is when the team is working as a group, energy is moving fluidly, smoothly. So if you look at your dog's body and you can start to read, is energy moving or is it not moving? If it's not moving, then he reacts instinctually, and that's going to be a problem.
Like the pack behaviors.
Right. If it is moving smoothly, you will always get cooperation. So the first step is to ask very simple questions. So let me make this point of departure with all the models. Right now, everybody's focused on the brain. Is the dog thinking, and what are the instincts? And I'm trying to teach a new model that think of the dog as a pipe. If energy goes through the pipe, the dog is happy, and he will always choose to be cooperative. So the information's in the energy. That's what I'm trying to say. The information is not in the mind. It's in the energy, and the mind coalesces around that energetic dynamic.
So the
and
energy,
it's easy to see.
The energy affects the mind.
The energy is how the mind is composed, exactly. It's the other way around. It's a bubble-up consciousness model versus a trickle-down.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about how dogs are doing in America right now. Our new president is going to get a puppy, and everybody seems to be quite interested in that. In fact, he's got more emails about his new puppy than he has about all the other issues put together. So it's people seem like they're really passionate about dogs. And how are dogs doing out there?
Well, you know, on the surface, it looks pretty good. You got Petcos, you got all the big shops, you got the big guns of medicine being trained on canine maladies. There's trainers everywhere. Everybody believes in training. There's rescue shelters, there's rescue organizations, and yet we're still killing the same X millions of dogs per year. I always say 3 to 4 million. You always correct me with 7 to 8. So,
right.
But it's millions upon millions. We're breeding less dogs these days, and yet we're still killing millions and millions of dogs. So I can look back on over 50 years in the business, and then calling up my dad's experiences, 60, 70 years in the business in dogdom from his childhood. And in my point of view, from my perspective, the dog is getting weaker constitutionally and socially. We see more aggression now than ever. Phobias, separation anxieties are exponentially rising. Rates of those are rising. And worse, the physical health of the dog is getting weaker.
Now, why do you think this is happening?
For the first time in the history of the relationship between man and dog, and we could talk about how that evolved, what the human beings think about being social is the main selective pressure on the dog. So in the old days, my theory is that only thing that mattered was hunting. So if your dog hunted, you selected for that dog, and that took care of everything because, as I was mentioning earlier, it's all about teamwork. Hunting is teamwork. What's really interesting about wolves is they're very weak-jawed relative to the other predators. If you've ever been bit by a cat or a dog, I don't know about you, but I prefer to get bitten by a dog any day. If you ever been bitten by a horse, I'd prefer the dog any day. So the dog is relatively weak-jawed, and that's really an important understanding of the dog, that he wants something. He chases a prey, a moose, that he can't physically overpower and can barely even harm. So he needs to cooperate with others of the same like-mindedness to get what he wants. And the hunt took care of that. So if you selected the golden to hunt birds, it had to stand up to the 12-gauge shotgun, it had to wait, go out and get the kill later, and it had to have all this composure. Or if you selected for the German Shepherd sheep herding dog, which is a form of hunting, it's a hunting analog completely. What's in it for the dog? He's herding the caribou as far as the dog can feel. So every little function we want a dog to do is a derivative of this master hunting program of wolf. And it takes care of everything. It takes care of the social makeup and the physical makeup. Therefore, dogs have always been hardy. But in the 60s, a judgment entered our consciousness, which was friendliness was a desirable temperament trait. And I can remember exactly when breeders of the Doberman Pinscher started selecting. I can remember when you'd read a classified ad in the paper, and it said, temperament friendly, tested friendly puppies. When temperament testing became a big thing in the late 60s. And everyone was testing for friendliness. And you can mark the decline of all the breeds. It's more that than it is AKC inbreeding show practices, which are very bad too for a different kind of reason. But that when human beings said, we know what made the most sociable animal on the face of the earth social, that's when dogs went into decline.
So when we started to select for friendliness, that's when the dogs got weaker.
Right.
So what is friendliness in a dog?
Friendliness is a form of defensiveness. So and I would like to say also that anything we feel, dogs feel. So how do we feel when we're made submissive? We don't feel so good.
Right.
How do we feel when we're acting dominant? We don't feel very good. We feel brittle. So how do we feel when we're friendly? And the example I like to give is the first 10 minutes of a cocktail party is a lot of friendliness. Doesn't feel too good. After you make contact with someone, energy starts to move. Oh, you like this? I like this. And then you start communicating and playing verbal ping pong with your emotion. Then it gets to be fun.
So when you're part of a team working towards a goal, you're part of a football team, that feels good.
Right.
And everybody has a different place.
Right.
And they have a goal in common. And
Right.
that feels good. But when you're dominating somebody else in a relationship or whatever, or if you're submissive, that feels bad. So you're saying that that's what we're doing to dogs. We're doing the dominant and submission. It's not working on many levels. So what does it look like to raise a dog not using those two models? Because I think a lot of people can't even get their head around what do you do?
Well, the number one thing with a puppy is to bond on walks in the woods. And he's just going to be naturally orgasmic and just having the time of his life. And he's giving you credit. Because when you have a little puppy, you're the most exciting thing on the face of the earth. You displace the most mass in his impression of reality. So everywhere he goes, if you're with him, he gives you credit. Now, it's not natural for a wolf to hang around the den or the pack leader. You know, if he sees a bunny rabbit and he's 2 years of age, he should chase that bunny rabbit. And matter of fact, the pack leader will follow him. So it's not natural to stay that glommed on to the pack. And they go off and look for the group. And like I was mentioning earlier, everybody in the wolf pack would follow and they'd all be a group innately. So it would have sprung up naturally. So if you just take your puppy for walks in the woods and he goes a little too far and you hide out of sight and he comes flying back to find you and you jolly him up and you pet him, that is the number one thing you can do with a puppy.
And most people think that they need to expose their puppy to many different environments so that it will get used to those environments and that it should encounter lots of different kinds of dogs so that it can, I guess the theory is, that is how a puppy develops socially.
Well, we have a mental trickle-down model. So the neurological research says if we really stimulate organisms, they develop more nervous connections, more synaptic connections in the brain. They get more developed, more elaborate, more intelligent. So the current generation, the last couple of generations of when this brain research came into the marketplace, puppy owners feel compelled to stimulate their puppies. And this is not natural. There is, and that's why I alluded to the point earlier, that the information's in the energy. So if you hyperstimulate a puppy, the body as pipe, it can't move that energy. It treats that as toxic just as if it absorbed a toxin. I like to give the example. 1 piece of chocolate cake is great. 6 pieces of chocolate cake, your body treats it just like you just took a poison, and it's bad.
And so you were saying that when you take the puppy for walks in the woods and it's giving you the credit for all the good feelings.
Right.
What about, for instance, my brother took his dog to the mall and tried to get it to go up the escalator. It was just a baby and the dog was freaking out. I mean, it felt a lot of fear. Is the dog actually giving the owner credit for that bad feeling? Yeah,
then he will then he's got to attribute the negative, the interruption of flow of energy, to the most intense thing. And he will try to attribute it to the escalator, but there's nothing very well that's going to plug in there, so he will blame the owner. Now, especially if the owner's doing a lot of correcting around the house, then he will be glommed onto the owner with that association. That's the beginning of a lot of dysfunction.
So would you say the number one thing that's going on for dog owners today is that they're overstimulating their puppies?
Right. They're taking them to play groups. Now, I don't mind taking them to equally matched puppies. That's great fun. But when they start imposing controls on it, I call it Little League for dogs. You know, the kids used to go and play. Look how kids used to be in the old days, free-range childhoods. They'd go to the sand lot and they would make the game. And there was an interesting thing was to keep the energy going in the game. So if 2 guys, 2 girls or whatever started arguing about who was safe, who was out, there was this amazing principle called do-over.
Right.
And you just did it over.
Did it over again.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was too close to call because there's no adults around, no real rules. It was a spontaneous, nobody can play if the game stops.
Right.
So there was this flow of energy was so important. Okay, let's do over. And it was had a point of resolution to it.
Right.
And it was a fair, everybody got that because it kept the flow going. There was no rank, there was no anything. And because now if the strongest, bullish kid just dominated and said, no, this is the way it's going to be, I'm not out, I'm safe, then the kids would say, well, then we quit.
Yeah, nobody wants
we
to
quit.
play anymore.
Yeah, good
Right.
for you, we go home. We take our ball and go home.
Right.
And then the bully said, well, I don't want that. I like to play the game. So
Right.
he would self-modify.
Right.
So whenever you see animals interacting, I like to use the seesaw metaphor. It's as if like two kids come on a playground and there's the seesaw. One child is much heavier than the other child. So he'll sit up closer and this one will sit at the end and they get flow.
And so you're saying that's what dogs want.
That,
They just want
that
the
runs
energy to
everything. They
move.
just want flow. If you're the source of flow, you're the leader. If you want to even use the word leader, they give you credit. And I like to use the example of a football team. The most dominant player, or let's say the leader on a football team, is invariably the quarterback.
Right.
And he's not necessarily physically, he's
Right,
physically
he's
the least
small.
imposing.
Right.
And emotionally, he may be dynamic, but he may not be. And classic case of that is Eli Manning. A year ago at this time, everybody was yelling, he's not a leader, he's not dynamic, he's not demonstrative, he's too soft. But he put the ball in the end zone
Right.
enough, everybody's emotions worked, energy flowed, he's now a great leader as far as everybody's concerned.
So how does that relate? How does that relate to dogs?
Well, when you're walking in the woods, by definition, there's a ton of flow in a young puppy. Now, the natural method is to keep that very pristine template alive for the next 2 to 3 years. And here's an important point of departure about natural dog training and clicker training, positive training, and dominance training is this is the only model that articulates an emotional development that takes 2, if not 3 years of unfolding. So in the other mental models, it's as if the formative period is the first couple months,
Right.
and that's it.
And then if you don't do something in that time,
You
lost your chance.
Exactly.
Right.
And that is a huge misconception. There is what I call temperament, but we should really call heart. Sounds a little romantic, but we can get very clinical about it if you want. But this takes 2 to 3 years to fully manifest in the mind of this growing puppy. And that's why it takes 2 years to have a good working dog. It takes 2 years to have a good seeing eye dog. It takes 2 years to have a problem dog. So for 2 years, he was friendly, boom, and then he loses it.
Because a lot of people say that, oh, I never saw that coming. My dog's always
Yeah,
been
he never
so
did that
friendly.
before.
Where did that come from? How did that happen?
Right, but I would have seen it from day one. I would have seen it so early with this vibration, this intense vibration, which is telling us, geez, the body is stuck, it's vibrating. The energy is not moving, and it'll always come out dysfunctionally.
So what can the modern dog owner do to...
Well, when your dog isn't ready, you have to have mechanical solutions. So I don't consider a dog really trustworthy. I like to go really slow with house training, take a year. And in the meantime, I use crates, I use kennels, I use fenced yards. I want a mechanical solution because he's just not emotionally. This mechanism isn't developed enough where I can say, okay, sort of like a kid. I mean, a child can drive a car at 12 years of age, mechanically, physically,
Right.
mentally. As a matter of fact, out west, there's an exclusion where children can drive pickup trucks on the farm roads to get from one part of the farm and the other because
Right.
they're big farms. They're 12 years old, they can do it. They just can't drive other than that.
Right.
So a child can do it, but they're not emotionally ready till 16 or maybe not even until 21.
Right.
So it's the same thing with the dog has this emotional development period. He's not ready, except if he's frightened. Then when he's in the house, he'll be constrained. People confuse that for understanding he should keep the house clean.
So you think people are just moving way too fast?
They go too fast. They go too fast. And yes, they get a very clean, mannerly dog in the house, but then down the road they get noise phobias, they get separation anxieties, or they get aggression. Or they get a dog that's just manic. He's not problematic per se, but he's hyper.
So you're saying number one is lots of nice, good long walks in the woods. and taking your time and not expecting too much out of a puppy?
Yeah, when the dog is ready, he's ready. I also like to put this into the discussion too, is only in dog training do we say it should be quick. Like on the way over here, I went by a stables, and I go by the stables all the time. And every time I go by, I see some rider, a young rider, going around the same ring year after year.
Right.
And I suppose every year the rails are maybe 6 inches higher. But there's obviously an art form to what that child is learning about relating to an animal, learning the skills. You take your child to ballet, piano, so on and so forth. There's an art to everything. But when dog training, it's not acknowledged. It's said, nope, the dog's got to learn the rules like that. This is the way it must be. And that is an interesting reason why we look at the dog that way. And only the dog that way. If when people ask me, what should I read about the natural way of dogs, I say, read the horse books. Watch RFD and the horse trainers. They are so far ahead of the dog people because they are really starting to talk about energy.
But there seems to be just a glut of books out there about dogs. And how does a person, sort through it all?
Every book, let me put it this way, if you're not talking about an energy theory, every book will have a self-defeating logic loop. It'll contradict itself quickly. And it'll contradict itself often in the title. So for example, if you look at the book Hidden Life of Dogs, well, there's nothing hidden about the life of dogs. So it contradicts itself right in the title. If you look at a book like Caesar's Way and you look at the picture of the dogs, they're all looking the wrong way. They're all looking every which way. And only Caesar's looking forward.
So people really
That's
need
a pack
they
instinct.
need to pay attention to what they're
Well, I want to
learning.
teach people how to be critical readers. And my point being, if you don't have an energy theory, then you're going to always contradict. You're going to have a personality theory, as they call it, and you're always going to run into contradictions. Okay, you're going to say, I have an alpha male dog. And then you're going to run into a puppy he likes, and the puppy's going to run roughshod over him.
Right.
Or you're going to have a kitty cat that makes your dog do everything. So what happened to so whenever I talk to people, they say, my dog's really alpha, but they're always confused. But over here, it doesn't act like that.
Right. So it's
Because what they then see, well, if they have this so-called dominant dog, which is really fear-driven, well, then they see the fear come out in another place, and they're confused by that. Whereas in an energy theory, that makes total sense.
But there is one book that people can buy, and that's the book you wrote, Natural Dog Training.
Yes,
which
it's
you
all
can-
laid out there.
Which you can get on Amazon, right?
Yep. The paperback version I reprinted after my hardback went out of print. It's now available on Amazon.
Yep, best dog book ever.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yeah, that's the first half an hour.